I pressed my forehead against the cold iron of the cage, vibrations from the auction block rattling through my skull, loosening teeth that had already been loosened by my brother's fist 3 nights ago. The metal bars smelled of old blood and older fear, none of it mine, but that didn't matter. Fear was infectious in places like this. It soaked into the walls, the floor, the very air you breathed. They sold me for a handful of dirty bills. My own flesh and blood. My older brother, Lucas, stood at the edge of the stage, counting the cash with trembling fingers, not once meeting my eyes. My father had signed the paperwork with a flourish, already halfway out the door toward the nearest bar. Because my vocal cords were dead space. Because an omega who can't scream is either worthless or a premium commodity for the sickest bidders. My name is Evelyn, I'm 22 years old, and I have never spoken a single word out loud. Not because my throat doesn't work, it does, technically. The doctors said my vocal folds are intact. They called it conversion disorder when I was 12, after the 4th specialist ran the 7th test. Psychological, they said. Trauma-induced. My mother died giving birth to me. My father never forgave me for it. My brother learned that hatred by osmosis. By the time I was 5, I had stopped trying to speak. By the time I was 7, I had forgotten what my own voice sounded like. By the time I was 15, I had stopped believing I had one. The cage smelled of stale sweat and cheap liquor, the accumulated terror of every omega who had been dragged across this floor before me. I pressed myself into the corner, my knees drawn up to my chest, my thin arms wrapped around my shins. The concrete floor was cold against my bare feet. They had taken my shoes at the door. Property didn't need shoes. Sweat pooled at the base of my spine, chilling instantly against the drafty concrete of the holding pen. I traced the uneven seams of my frayed denim jeans, focusing on the rough texture rather than the heavy, suffocating scent of cheap cologne and desperation thickening the air. The auction handler, a hulking alpha with a neck the size of a tree trunk and a shaved head that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, unlocked the cage. The hinges groaned like something dying. He didn't speak to me. They never did. He just reached in, his meaty fingers clamping around my bicep hard enough to leave bruises. His grip was crushing, careless. He hauled me up like I weighed nothing, and I probably didn't weigh much. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. A half-stale piece of bread on the counter, left from Lucas's breakfast. I had taken it when his back was turned, eaten it in the bathroom with the door locked, chewing slowly so the crunching wouldn't give me away. My knees buckled slightly as he dragged me out of the cage, but I caught my balance. I had to. Falling meant kicks. Kicks meant bruised ribs. Bruised ribs made it hard to breathe. And breathing was the only thing I was currently good at. Lot 43, the handler grunted to the auctioneer, yanking the chain attached to the leather collar around my throat. The buckle pinched the skin of my neck, raw and chafed from 3 days of wearing it. Unclaimed omega. 22 years old. Mute. Defective vocal cords, permanent. The auctioneer, a thin beta with yellowed teeth and a cheap suit, squinted at me like I was a piece of livestock. Any bite history? Clean. Pregnancies? Virgin, the handler said, and the word made my stomach turn. He said it like it was a selling point. Because it was. The auctioneer nodded, scribbling something on a clipboard. Reserve. 20,000. The handler snorted. He's mute. You're lucky if you get 15. Buyers like them to make noise. I stumbled forward as he yanked the chain again, my bare feet slapping against the grimy linoleum floor of the corridor. The lights overhead buzzed, flickering a sickly yellow. I kept my eyes down. The cynical part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive for 22 years, calculated my worth automatically. 15,000. A used car. A down payment on a decent kitchen remodel. That's what a lifetime of my silent obedience bought. The double doors at the end of the hall opened, and the noise of the underground auction floor washed over me like a wave of filth. It wasn't the refined, champagne-clinking affair you saw in movies. It was a subterranean meat market. Smoke hung in the rafters, curling around exposed pipes and industrial lighting. The smell was a nauseating cocktail of cigar ash, spilled beer, and the oppressive, competing sense of alpha's posturing for dominance. Perfume couldn't cover it. Nothing could. The handler dragged me up 3 wooden steps onto a makeshift stage. A single spotlight blinded me, hot and white. I squinted, turning my head slightly, catching the dust motes dancing in the harsh beam like tiny, dying stars. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. Crying was a performance for an audience that cared, and there was no one here who gave a damn about the water leaking from my eyes. My father had beaten that out of me years ago. Tears meant more bruises. Silence meant survival. I just let my shoulders slump, withdrawing into the quiet, dark room inside my head. The place where no one could reach me. Next lot, the auctioneer barked into a staticky microphone. The feedback squealed, making several people in the front row wince. Unclaimed Omega. 22 years old. Defective vocal cords completely mute. Perfect for those who prefer a quiet house. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Crude, ugly laughter. Men, mostly alphas, though I caught the sour scent of a few betas in the mix, leered at me from their seats. I was nothing to them. A body. A hole. A thing that couldn't say no. Bids started low. Insultingly low. 500. 7. 1200. I watched a man in the front row, his shirt stained with what looked like mustard and his gut straining against his belt, raise a paddle. His scent was rank, old cigar smoke, and something sour underneath, like milk that had turned. My stomach seized. I knew what men like that did with things that couldn't fight back. I had seen the videos on Lucas's phone, heard him laughing with his friends in the next room. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted the familiar, metallic tang of my own blood. 2000, someone else called. 3. 5. The numbers blurred together, meaningless. I wasn't listening anymore. I was counting the cracks in the ceiling, the water stains that looked vaguely like maps of countries I would never visit. I was building walls in my head, brick by brick, preparing for whatever came next. Then the atmospheric pressure in the room dropped. It wasn't a metaphor. The air actually grew heavy, pressing against my eardrums, making my chest feel tight. The idle chatter died in increments, like a wave receding from the shore. The overlapping, suffocating sense of 100 different alphas were suddenly obliterated by something singular and terrifying. Wintergreen. Sharp, clean, and utterly cold. Frost on bare branches. Ice forming on a lake in the dead of night. And underneath it, something darker, smoke from a fireplace on the coldest day of the year, the kind of smell that made you want to curl up and never leave. But beneath the comfort, there was danger. A warning. This was not a scent that invited approach. It was a scent that said, I am here. You will move. I opened my eyes, peering through the glare of the spotlight. The crowd parted. They didn't just step aside. They recoiled, pulling their chins down in involuntary submission, their sense spiking with fear and deference. Even the auctioneer faltered, his next word dying in his throat. She didn't look like a queen. Not the way stories described queens anyway. No crown. No cape. No elaborate gown trailing behind her. She wore a charcoal gray pantsuit that fit her lean, powerful frame like a second skin, tailored, expensive, but wrinkled at the elbows, like she'd been wearing it for a 16-hour flight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a low, severe ponytail, a few stray strands escaping to frame her sharp cheekbones. Her jaw was cut like glass, clean and angular. But it was her eyes that pinned me to the floorboards. Pale gray, almost silver, cold, calculating, and deeply, profoundly exhausted. Serena Blackwood. I had heard the name whispered in dark corners, spoken with a mixture of reverence and terror. The Alpha Queen of the Eastern Territories. The youngest alpha to claim a throne in a century. A woman who had built an empire from nothing, who ruled with an iron fist wrapped in silk, who had never been seen with an omega at her side. Some said she didn't want one. Some said she couldn't keep one. Some said she was waiting for something no one could give her. She ignored the auctioneer. She ignored the men and women bowing their heads as she passed, their bodies curving away from her like water around a stone. She walked straight up to the edge of the stage, her heels clicking against the wood floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The handler holding my chain froze. His knuckles went white around the leather strap. His sense spiked with pure, unadulterated terror, the kind that made betas regret every life choice that had led them to this moment. Serena didn't shout a bit. She reached into the breast pocket of her blazer, pulled out a matte black card, and tossed it onto the wooden planks at the handler's feet. It made a sharp thwack that echoed through the suddenly silent room. "Clear the debts of the beta who brought her in," Serena said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried a low-frequency rumble that vibrated against my ribcage that made my omega hindbrain sit up and take notice in a way nothing ever had before. It was the voice of someone who had never been told no, who had never needed to raise it to be heard. All of them. The father, too. Every cent they owe to every shark they've borrowed from. She paused, tilting her head slightly, her silver eyes fixed on the handler's face. "And give me the leash." The handler didn't hesitate. He dropped the chain like it was burning his skin, which, given the way his hands were shaking, it might as well have been. He snatched the card off the floor, his fingers fumbling, and practically tripped over himself, backing away from the stage. Serena didn't watch him go. Her attention had shifted, and now it was fully, completely on me. She looked up at the stage, at the platform where I stood barefoot and trembling, wearing a threadbare t-shirt and jeans that were 2 sizes too big. She didn't leer. She didn't look at my body like she was appraising livestock. She looked at my mouth. Then up to my eyes. "Come down," she ordered quietly. I didn't move. My brain misfired, skidding like a car on black ice. Authority usually came with spittle and raised fists, with the sharp sting of a palm across my cheek or the dull thud of a boot against my ribs. This quiet command felt like a trap, like the kind of calm that preceded an explosion. I gripped the fabric of my jeans, my toes curling against the rough wood of the stage. Serena sighed. It was a brief flare of irritation, the first crack in her perfect composure. Her jaw tightened, the muscle ticking near her ear. She stepped onto the stage, the wood groaning under her weight, and approached me slowly. Her hands were visible, palms open, fingers relaxed. The scent of wintergreen intensified, sharp and clean, making the hairs on my arms stand up. But underneath it, something else. Something warm. Wood smoke. Vanilla. The smell of a cabin in the middle of a snowstorm, of safety found in the most unexpected places. A deep, grounding scent that made something primal in my chest tighten and ache. She reached out and wrapped her fingers around the leather leash attached to my collar. Her grip was firm, but not cruel. She didn't yank. She just turned and walked back toward the edge of the stage, the chain hanging loosely between us. I had a choice. Stand still and let the collar choke me or follow. I followed. I walked off that stage, stepping into the absolute unknown, tethered to a winter storm in a charcoal suit. The back of the town car smelled like expensive leather polish and the lingering ghost of black coffee. It was a suffocating kind of luxury, the kind that made my skin crawl because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I didn't belong here. I sat pressed against the furthest door, my knees drawn up tight to my chest, my bare feet tucked away from the pristine floor mats. I made myself as small as possible, a knot on a log, a piece of lint in the corner of a palace. Serena sat on the opposite bench seat, facing me. She hadn't spoken since we left the warehouse. She had an iPad open on her lap, the blue light casting harsh geometric shadows across her sharp cheekbones. She was typing, her fingers moving with rhythmic, aggressive precision against the glass screen. Tap tap. Swipe tap. Tap tap tap. The silence between us was profound. I was used to being ignored. My family specialized in treating me like a broken piece of furniture. Lucas ignored me because he despised me. My father ignored me because I reminded him of my mother. Their indifference was a weapon, sharp and familiar. But this felt different. Serena ignored me because I was a solved problem. She had bought me, acquired the asset, completed the transaction. And now she was back to work, checking emails or approving contracts or doing whatever billionaire alpha queens did on their iPads at midnight. I watched the city blur past the tinted windows. Rain had started to fall, thick fat drops streaking the glass, distorting the neon signs of late-night diners and liquor stores. We were leaving the city behind, climbing into the hills where the streets were dark and the houses were invisible behind walls and gates. I shivered. The air conditioning in the car was brutal, seeping into the damp fabric of my cheap t-shirt. I rubbed my arms, the friction loud in the quiet cabin. My teeth threatened to chatter, and I clamped my jaw shut, pressing my lips together until they went numb. Serena's typing stopped. I froze, squeezing my eyes shut. Stupid. You're making noise. You're being annoying. I braced myself for the backhand. Lucas always swung backhanded when I distracted him from the television, or at least a sharp command to be quiet. Serena sighed. That same tired exhalation from the auction floor. I heard the rustle of fabric. I flinched hard, pulling my arms over my head, burying my face in my knees. Here it comes. Here it comes. Something heavy and warm draped over me. I opened one eye, peering through the cage of my arms. A blazer. Charcoal gray, still radiating her body heat, still carrying the scent of her, that sharp wintergreen and wood smoke, clean and cold and strangely inviting. It smelled overwhelmingly of her, but underneath, something softer. Cashmere. Vanilla. A hint of something floral I couldn't name. I blinked, confused. I looked up. Serena was back to her iPad, wearing only a white silk blouse, the sleeves rolled up to expose lean, muscled forearms. Her dark hair had come loose from its ponytail, falling in waves around her face. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask for a thank you. She just kept working, her thumbs moving across the screen like nothing had happened. I slowly lowered my arms. I touched the wool of the blazer. It was softer than anything I had ever owned, softer than the blanket my mother had supposedly knitted for me before she died, the one Lucas had burned when I was 12 because I didn't deserve it. Cautiously, feeling like a thief, I pulled the blazer tighter around my shoulders. The shivering stopped. The scent enveloped me, wrapping around my senses like a second skin. Wintergreen. Wood smoke. Vanilla. Safe. Sheltered. Claimed. I hated that instinct. I crushed it down, replacing it with the cynical sneer that had kept me alive for 22 years. She's protecting her investment. You don't let a $20,000 asset catch pneumonia. But I didn't give the blazer back. The estate appeared out of the darkness like something from a dream. High iron gates swung open silently as the car approached. We drove through a dense line of ancient oak trees, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the rain. The gravel driveway crunched under the tires, and then the house came into view. It wasn't a Gothic mansion. It wasn't a castle with turrets and moats. It was a sprawling modern compound of glass, steel, and pale stone, built into the side of a forested hill. Lights glowed warm and golden behind floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing glimpses of rooms that looked like they belonged in architecture magazines. The car stopped under a massive cantilevered awning. A driver in a dark suit opened Serena's door. She stepped out into the damp night air, her heels sinking slightly into the wet gravel. She didn't wait for me, nor did she pull the leash, which she had unclipped from my collar the moment we got in the car and tossed onto the center console like it was garbage. I scrambled out of my side, the blazer slipping off my shoulders. I caught it, clutching it to my chest, my bare feet hitting the cold, wet pavement. Serena was already walking toward the massive glass front doors. I jogged to keep up, terrified of being locked out in the dark. The interior was vast. Soaring ceilings, slate floors, minimalist furniture that looked terrifyingly expensive. It was cold, sterile. Beautiful in the way a museum was beautiful, something to look at, not to touch. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs that anyone actually lived here. Just sweeping architectural lines and the distant hum of central heating and the faint, lingering scent of wintergreen everywhere. "Mrs. Hartwell," Serena said. A woman materialized from a hallway. She was older, 60, maybe, a beta with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and a face that had perfected the art of revealing nothing. She wore a tailored gray dress and sensible heels, and she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been doing this job for decades. "Yes, Ms. Blackwood? This is Evelyn." Serena gestured vaguely in my direction while unbuttoning her collar. "Put her in the East Guest Suite. Find her some clothes. Call Dr. Chen for a standard checkup tomorrow morning. She's malnourished." Mrs. Hartwell's eyes flicked to me. They were analytical, not unkind, but devoid of pity. She looked at my thin arms, my hollow cheeks, the way I was clutching Serena's blazer like a lifeline. Then she nodded. "Of course. And dinner. I ate on the plane. See if she wants anything." Serena paused, her silver eyes flicking to me for the first time since we'd entered the house. "Something warm. Soup, maybe. Easy to digest." Mrs. Hartwell nodded again. "Understood. I'm going to my study. Do not disturb me unless the European markets collapse." Serena turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the slate floor. She didn't look back. She didn't tell me what the rules were. She didn't threaten me. She just vanished down a long hallway, leaving me standing in the foyer, dripping rainwater onto the pristine floor. Mrs. Hartwell looked at me. "Follow me, please." She led me up a floating glass staircase and down a corridor lined with abstract art that probably cost more than my father's house. She opened a heavy oak door and stepped back. I walked in. The room was the size of my entire childhood home. A massive bed with crisp white linens dominated the center, flanked by sleek nightstands with soft amber lamps. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the dark forest, rain streaming down the glass in rivulets. There was a sitting area with a velvet sofa, a massive television mounted on the wall, and an ensuite bathroom clad in pale marble. "The bathroom has towels. There is a robe in the closet," Mrs. Hartwell said smoothly. "I will have a tray of food brought up shortly. Is there anything specific you require?" I stared at her. I pointed to my throat, then shook my head. "I am aware you are nonverbal, Evelyn," she said patiently, like she was explaining something to a child. "You can nod or shake your head or write it down. There is a notepad on the nightstand." I shook my head again. I didn't want anything. I just wanted her to leave so I could find the trap. "Very well. Good night." She stepped out and closed the door. I waited for the heavy click of a deadbolt. Silence. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. Nothing. I reached out my trembling hand and grasped the brushed steel handle. I pushed down. The door opened smoothly. It wasn't locked. I backed away, my breath coming slightly faster, my heart hammering against my ribs. A cage with an open door is far more terrifying than a locked one. It means the keeper is confident you have nowhere else to go. Or they want you to run so they have an excuse to hunt. I retreated to the bathroom. I locked that door. It made me feel marginally better, and ignored the massive walk-in shower with its rainfall showerhead and the glowing vanity mirrors that showed me exactly how pathetic I looked. Instead, I grabbed the thick plush bath mat, dragged it to the narrow space between the toilet and the cold marble wall, and curled up into a tight ball. I pulled Serena's blazer over my head, burying my nose in the scent of wintergreen and wood smoke, and waited for the punishment that I was certain was coming. I woke up to the agonizing ache of my own ribs pressing into the marble floor. My neck was stiff, bent at an unnatural angle against the porcelain base of the toilet. Dust motes danced in a shaft of pale morning light cutting through the frosted bathroom window. Somewhere outside, birds were singing, a sound so normal, so mundane, that it felt like a personal insult. Panic flared instantly, a hot spike in my chest. Where was I? The smell hit me first. Not stale beer and mildew. Wintergreen. Wood smoke. Clean linen. The Blackwood estate. I had been bought. I untangled myself from Serena's blazer, folding it meticulously with shaking hands. My stomach let out a hollow, painful groan. I hadn't eaten the food Mrs. Hartwell had left on the tray outside my door last night. I had been too terrified to open the bedroom door again, convinced it was a test, a trap, a way to see if I would break the rules I hadn't been told yet. Now the hunger was a physical claw tearing at my insides. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped into the bedroom. The tray was gone. Mrs. Hartwell, or someone else, had removed it while I slept in the bathroom. The realization that someone had been in the room while I was utterly defenseless made my skin crawl. I needed food. I needed to figure out the layout of this gilded cage before the walls closed in. I slipped out of the bedroom, my bare feet silent on the thick carpet of the hallway. The house was dead quiet. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dustless surfaces, making the entire place look like a high-end furniture showroom before opening hours. I found the stairs and crept down. The kitchen was easy to find. I just followed the faint, lingering scent of roasted coffee and something sweet, like pastries fresh from the oven. It was massive. White marble countertops, stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant kitchen, and an island the size of a small boat. I moved quickly, darting from the doorway to the pantry. I didn't dare open the massive double-door refrigerator. It might beep, or the light might alert someone. Instead, I found a loaf of artisanal bread on the counter in a wooden box. I tore a chunk off with my hands, shoving the dry bread into my mouth. It tasted like ash, but my stomach clamped around it gratefully. I grabbed a heavy ceramic plate from a drying rack, intending to take another slice back to my room. Footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic, approaching from the back hallway. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned, dropping the bread. Serena walked into the kitchen. She was drenched in sweat, wearing dark athletic leggings and a fitted tank top that clung to the lean, powerful architecture of her body. A damp towel hung around her neck. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her pale skin was flushed pink across her cheeks and chest. The scent of wintergreen was suffocatingly intense now, spiked with the raw, clean musk of an alpha fresh from physical exertion. She stopped when she saw me. She was breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling, her silver eyes sharp and alert despite the obvious exhaustion. She looked at the breadcrumbs on my chin, the chunk of bread in my hand, the way I was frozen like a deer in headlights. My fingers, slick with nervous sweat, slipped. The heavy ceramic plate slid from my grasp. Time seemed to slow down. I watched it fall, the white rim spinning, catching the morning light. I saw my own reflection in the glossy surface for just a moment. Wide eyes, hollow cheeks, a mouth open in a silent scream that would never come out. It hit the slate floor with a sound like a gunshot. Crash. Shards of white ceramic exploded outward, skittering across the floor like pieces of a shattered moon. I didn't think. Instinct, beaten into me over 2 decades, reinforced by every slap, every kick, every closed fist, took over completely. I dropped to my knees right there in the debris, curling into a tight fetal ball, my hands slapping over the back of my neck, tucking my chin to my chest. I made myself as small a target as possible. I waited for the roar. I waited for the heavy boot to connect with my ribs. I waited for the sharp, stinging slap across the side of my head that would leave my ear ringing for hours. Lucas hated broken dishes. Breaking a dish meant a week with a bruised jaw. Breaking something valuable meant worse. Much worse. I screwed my eyes shut, trembling so violently my teeth clattered together. My vocal cords strained, phantom screams trapped in a ruined throat that had forgotten how to make sound. The silence stretched. 1 second. 5 seconds. 10. No yell. No blow. Evelyn. Her voice was a low, resonant rumble. It didn't sound angry. It sounded cautious. Careful. Like she was approaching a wounded animal. I didn't move. Moving was dangerous. Defiance brought worse pain. I heard the soft pat of her bare feet against the stone. She was moving slowly, deliberately, each step measured and announced. The scent of wintergreen wrapped around me, heavy and clean, undercut with something warmer now, wood smoke, vanilla, a hint of something floral. She stopped right in front of me. I could see the tips of her bare toes, painted a dark burgundy that seemed almost out of place on someone so controlled. Look at me. It wasn't a request. It was an alpha command, wrapped in velvet, slipping straight into my hindbrain. My body reacted before my conscious mind could stop it. I uncurled slightly, slowly lifting my head, keeping my hands over my neck. Serena was kneeling amidst the shattered ceramic. She wasn't glaring at me. Her silver eyes were scanning my posture, dissecting the tight, terrified knot of my body. Her jaw was tight, a muscle ticking near her ear. But her hands were open, resting lightly on her thighs. She looked at the broken plate, then back at me. "It's a plate," she said softly. "It's baked mud. It costs $17. I have 47 more exactly like it in the pantry." I stared at her, my chest heaving, air whistling through my nose. I didn't understand. Why wasn't she hitting me? Serena reached out slowly. I flinched, snapping my eyes shut again, bracing for the blow. She didn't touch me. I heard the grinding of ceramic against stone. I opened my eyes to see her using her bare hands to sweep the sharp shards into a pile. She wasn't being careful. A jagged edge caught the side of her palm, drawing a thin bead of dark blood. She ignored it. She pushed the broken pieces into a neat pile away from my bare knees. "You don't cower in this house, Evelyn," Serena said, her voice completely devoid of the violence I expected. "You don't beg. And you do not expect me to strike you. Do you understand?" I stared at the blood on her hand, then at her face. The cynical, defensive walls in my mind scrambled to find an angle. She's playing mind games. She wants you to trust her before she breaks you. It's a new kind of torture. It's always the nice ones who hurt you worst. But my omega instincts, the ones that read pheromones and micro-expressions, the ones that had kept me alive by predicting danger before it arrived, told a different story. Her scent wasn't spiked with malice or the sour tang of anticipated cruelty. It was steady. Annoyed, maybe. Exasperated, certainly. But steady. And underneath the annoyance, something else. Concern. She stood up, towering over me again. She wiped her bleeding hand carelessly on her towel, leaving a smear of red against the white fabric. "Get up, Evelyn. The floor is cold." She stepped over the pile of glass, walked to the massive refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water, and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. I stayed on my knees for a long time, staring at the little drops of red blood mixed with the white ceramic shards. My family sold me because I was broken. But as I touched the cold stone floor, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. What if the Alpha Queen is just as broken as I am? Rubbing alcohol burned the inside of my nose before the cotton swab even touched the split skin of my knuckles. I sat rigidly on the edge of the guest bed, my fingers digging into the plush white duvet. Dr. Chin, a petite beta woman with sharp features and an even sharper gaze, smelled of peppermint and sterile latex. She moved with an irritating clinical detachment, pressing the icy bell of her stethoscope against my spine. I sucked in a sharp breath through my teeth. "Deep breath," Dr. Chin instructed, her voice a dry monotone. I obeyed. My ribs protested, a dull familiar ache stretching across my left side. I kept my eyes fixed on the floorboards, counting the subtle variations in the wood grain. Counting kept me tethered. It stopped me from bolting. Serena stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her suit today, just a heavy dark knit sweater that emphasized the lean, powerful architecture of her shoulders and a pair of black slacks. Her arms were crossed over her chest. She was silent, watching the examination with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Her scent, that volatile mix of wintergreen and wood smoke, filled the large room, pressing down on me like a physical weight. "Severe malnutrition," Dr. Chin muttered, scribbling on a digital tablet. "Chronic dehydration. Contusions in various stages of healing along the torso and upper thighs. There's an old fracture in the floating rib that wasn't set properly. It healed crooked." I shrank in on myself, curling my shoulders forward to hide the yellowing bruises painting my ribs. Humiliation tasted like bile in the back of my throat. I was an open ledger of abuse. A defective product laid out under harsh fluorescent lights. I waited for Serena to sigh in disgust. I waited for her to demand a refund from the auction house. Nobody pays $20,000 for a broken toy. "And her throat?" Serena asked. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. Dr. Chin stepped around to my front. She shined a blinding penlight into my eyes, then gestured for me to open my mouth. I hesitated, my jaw clenching. Serena uncrossed her arms. The movement was slight, but the shift in the air was absolute. I opened my mouth, letting the doctor press a wooden tongue depressor flat against the back of my tongue. I gagged slightly. "No physical abnormalities," Dr. Chin concluded, tossing the wooden stick into a biohazard bin. "The vocal folds are intact. The neural pathways appear functional. This is almost certainly psychogenic, a conversion disorder. The body has learned that speaking is unsafe, so it has stopped speaking." She looked at Serena, then back at me. "Theoretically, it could be treated. Therapy. A safe environment. Time. But there are no guarantees. Some patients never regain their voice." I dropped my gaze back to the floor. Defective. The word echoed in my skull, carrying my father's drunken sneer, Lucas's mocking laughter. Serena didn't say anything for a long time. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I gripped the duvet tighter, my knuckles turning white. My heart hammered against my crooked rib. This was it. She was calculating the loss. She was going to send me back. Then Serena's scent spiked. It wasn't directed at me. The wintergreen flared, sharp and dangerous, flooding the room with a sudden oppressive, heavy pressure that made Dr. Chin stumble back half a step, dropping her tablet to her side. "Fix the malnutrition," Serena ordered. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it vibrated with a suppressed violence that made my stomach drop. "Give Mrs. Hartwell a dietary regimen. Vitamins. Whatever she needs. If anything hurts her, prescribe something for the pain." Dr. Chin swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Yes, Miss Blackwood." Serena turned on her heel and walked down the hall. She didn't look at me. She didn't offer a reassuring smile. She just left, taking the storm with her. I let out a shaky exhale, my lungs burning. The cynical voice in my head scrambled for footing. She's protecting her investment. You don't put premium gas in a wrecked car unless you plan on fixing it up to sell. I clung to that thought. It made sense. It was transactional. Transactional I could survive. Compassion would kill me. Cashmere feels wrong against skin that expects burlap. 21 days had passed since the auction. 3 weeks of an agonizing, quiet routine. I woke up. I ate the meticulously prepared meals Mrs. Hartwell left on a tray outside my unlocked door. I stared out the massive windows at the rain-soaked forest. I slept. I repeated. I was wearing a soft gray sweater Mrs. Hartwell had provided. It was so soft it felt like spun air, but it hung off my emaciated frame like a tent. I had gained a few pounds, enough that my ribs didn't show quite so prominently, enough that the hollows under my cheekbones had softened. But the weight meant nothing. The food meant nothing. The warm bed meant nothing. Because the collar was still there. The thick leather band around my throat, the one the auction house had put on me, was still buckled tight, the metal ring cold against my collarbone. Serena had removed the leash the moment we got in the car, but she had never taken off the collar. The leather was cracked and worn, stained with old sweat and older fear. It chafed against my skin every time I turned my head, leaving red marks that never quite healed. It was a physical anchor to my reality. I was an own thing. The soft bed, the warm food, the quiet house, none of it changed the heavy leather biting into my neck. None of it changed the fact that I was property, purchased, claimed. I couldn't take it anymore. The walls of the enormous bedroom felt like they were closing in. The silence was too loud, too heavy, pressing against my eardrums like water pressure. I needed air. I needed space. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house was a tomb of glass and slate. I crept down the floating staircase, my bare feet making no sound. I didn't know what I was looking for. An exit. A clue. A reason to be terrified. Anything. I found the library. The heavy double doors of dark oak were cracked open, a sliver of warm golden light spilling into the hallway. The scent of old paper, binding glue, and intense, concentrated wintergreen wafted into the corridor. I peeked through the gap. Serena sat behind a massive desk carved from a single slab of dark wood. A single desk lamp illuminated scattered financial documents and a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid, whiskey, maybe, or scotch. She looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under her silver eyes. Her dark hair had come loose from its usual ponytail, falling in messy waves around her pale face. She was staring blindly at a laptop screen, rubbing her temples with long, calloused fingers. I should have walked away. The survival instinct that had kept me alive for 22 years screamed at me to retreat to my corner and stay invisible. Don't draw attention. Don't be seen. Don't exist. But my throat itched. The collar pinched. And something else, something I didn't have a name for, pulled me toward her like a tide. I shifted my weight. The floorboard beneath my foot gave a microscopic, almost inaudible squeak. Serena's head snapped up. Her silver eyes locked onto the gap in the doors. For a split second, a flash of pure predatory alpha instinct hardened her features, her pupils dilating, her body tensing like a coiled spring. Then she recognized my scent. The tension bled out of her shoulders, replaced by a profound, weary sigh. Come in, Evelyn. I froze. Flight or fight? I had no fight, and fleeing would only initiate a chase. I pushed the heavy oak door open, slipping into the room. The library was cavernous, lined with thousands of books, the shelves reaching all the way to the vaulted ceiling. A rolling ladder stood against one wall, and a massive fireplace crackled at the far end, casting dancing shadows across the Persian rug. But the air felt thin, dominated entirely by her presence. I stopped 10 feet from the desk, wrapping my arms around my waist in a defensive hug. I kept my chin tucked down, but my eyes darted up, watching her hands. Serena closed her laptop. The sudden snap made me flinch. She leaned back in her leather chair, studying me. She looked at the oversized gray sweater, the way I was folding into myself, the way my bare feet were curled against the cold floor. Then her gaze drifted up and locked onto the thick black leather strapped around my neck. Her jaw tightened. The muscle near her ear ticked rhythmically. "Come here," she commanded softly. My stomach plummeted. This was it. The honeymoon period was over. She wanted to use what she bought. I forced my legs to move, dragging my feet across the antique Persian rug. Every step felt like walking to a gallows. The fire crackled to my left, warm and hungry. The shadows danced on the walls like spectators at an execution. I stopped beside her chair, my breathing shallow, my heart trying to batter its way out of my crooked ribs. Serena turned her chair to face me. She didn't reach for my waist. She didn't pull me onto her lap. She reached up, her long hands hovering just inches from my throat. "Hold still," she murmured. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the snap of the neck, the tightening of the strap. I held my breath until my lungs screamed. Her fingers brushed against my skin. They were rough, calloused, hands that had seen work, despite the wealth, but incredibly warm. She didn't grab. She slid her thumbs under the heavy leather collar, keeping her touch feather-light against my bruised flesh. I heard the faint clink of metal. The pressure vanished. A rush of cool, conditioned air hit the raw, sweaty skin of my neck. I snapped my eyes open, stumbling back a step. Serena held the ugly black auction collar in her hand. She looked at it like it was a rotting piece of meat. Disgust rolled off her in waves, thick and acrid in her scent, the first negative emotion I had ever clearly smelled from her. I stared at her, my chest heaving. I waited for her to open a drawer. I waited for her to pull out a new collar, something sleek, something with her name engraved on it. A tracker. A choke chain. A symbol of ownership. Every Omega with a master had a collar. It was the law of their brutal biology, the visible sign of belonging to someone. Even the kindest alphas collared their Omegas. It was protection, they said. A way to mark territory, to warn other alphas away. Serena stood up. She walked past me, carrying the leather strap. She approached the massive stone fireplace at the end of the room, where the fire was still crackling and popping, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Without a word, she tossed the collar into the flames. The leather hissed. Thick black smoke curled up the chimney, carrying the smell of burning hair and old grease and fear. The fire devoured it greedily, the flames turning briefly green before settling back to orange. Serena turned around, leaning her shoulder against the stone mantel. She shoved her hands into her pockets. "I don't keep pets, Evelyn," she said, her voice a low rumble over the crackling fire. "And I don't leash people." I stared at the melting buckle in the fire, the leather curling and blackening, the metal glowing red-hot. Then I looked back at her. My hands flew to my bare throat. It felt empty, exposed, vulnerable. A terrifying, dizzying wave of vertigo washed over me. I wanted the collar back. The collar made sense. It defined the rules. It told me exactly who I was and what to expect. It was a contract, written in leather and fear. Without it, I was untethered, floating in a terrifying void where the Alpha Queen didn't beat me, didn't use me, didn't even look at me with desire, and burned my chains instead. Tears, hot, shameful, and entirely unbidden, pricked the corners of my eyes. I hated them. I hated her for making me cry when my brother's fists couldn't. I hated my own weakness, my own desperate need for structure, for rules, for the familiar violence that I understood. I backed away toward the door, my breathing coming in ragged, silent gasps. Serena didn't move to stop me. She just watched me unravel, her silver eyes anchoring me to the floor even as my mind spun completely out of control. "Evelyn," she said quietly. I stopped. My hand was on the door handle, ready to flee. "Your room is not a prison. You can come and go as you please. The kitchen is always stocked. There's a garden in the back if you want fresh air." She paused, tilting her head. You are not a prisoner here. You are not a pet. You are not an investment. Then what am I? I wanted to scream. The words clawed at my throat, desperate and silent. Serena seemed to hear them anyway. You're a guest, she said. Nothing more. Nothing less. Stay as long as you want. Leave when you want. The choice is yours. She turned back to her desk, sat down, and reopened her laptop like I had already left. I stood there for a long moment, my hand frozen on the door handle. Then I walked out. Phantom pressure squeezed my throat for days. I found myself reaching up to scratch at a leather collar that was currently nothing more than a stain of ash in Serena's fireplace. My fingers would brush bare skin, and a cold shock of panic would seize my chest. I was naked without it. I was a kite with a snapped string, waiting for the wind to slam me into the dirt. On the fourth day without the collar, I finally left the guest room. Not to run. Not to escape. Just to walk. The house was enormous, larger than I had realized from my brief glimpses. I wandered through corridors lined with art, past rooms I couldn't begin to name, a conservatory filled with tropical plants, a screening room with velvet seats, a gym that looked like a professional facility, a swimming pool that stretched the length of a city block. Everywhere I went, the scent of wintergreen lingered faintly, a reminder that I was never truly alone. I found the garden on the fifth day. It was hidden behind the house, accessible through a set of French doors in the library. A Japanese-style garden, with a koi pond and a small wooden bridge and carefully raked gravel paths. Cherry trees line the edges, their branches bare this time of year, but still beautiful in their skeletal simplicity. I sat on a stone bench near the pond and watched the fish swim in lazy circles. The sun was warm on my face. The birds were singing. For the first time in as long as I could remember, no one was yelling at me. I stayed there for hours. The nightmares started on the seventh day. I had expected them earlier, honestly. My whole life had been a nightmare. What was a few more hours of terror while I slept? But the safety of the house, the soft bed, the absence of violence, it cracked something open in me. All the memories I had locked away came flooding back. My mother's face, pale and still in the hospital bed. My father's fist, swinging toward me when I was 6 years old. Lucas's laughter as he held me down I woke up gasping, my throat working soundlessly, my body drenched in sweat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the bedroom pressed in on me, too close, too dark. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet slipping on the hardwood floor, and ran. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to move, to escape, to find air that didn't feel like it was trying to kill me. I found myself in the library. The French doors to the garden were open, letting in the cool night air. The moon was full, casting silver light across the floor. And there, sitting in the armchair by the fireplace, still warm, the embers glowing faintly, was Serena. She was asleep. Her head was tilted back against the chair, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her mouth slightly open. She was wearing soft gray sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, her bare feet propped up on an ottoman. An empty glass sat on the table beside her, and her laptop was closed on her lap. She looked younger in sleep, less like the alpha queen who had parted a crowd with her presence and more like just a woman. A tired, overworked woman who had fallen asleep in the wrong room. I should have left. I should have gone back to my room, locked the door, and pretended this never happened. Instead, I crept closer. I knelt on the floor beside her chair, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough to smell the wintergreen and wood smoke that clung to her skin. I wrapped my arms around my knees and just breathed. In, out, in, out. Her scent filled my lungs, slow and steady, and the panic began to recede. The walls stopped pressing in. The air stopped suffocating me. I didn't know how long I sat there. Minutes, maybe. Hours. Long enough for the fire to die completely, for the moon to cross the sky. At some point, Serena shifted. I froze, expecting her to wake up, to ask what I was doing, to order me back to my room. She didn't wake up, but her hand, heavy and warm, dropped from the arm of the chair and landed on my shoulder. It wasn't a grab. It wasn't a restraint. It was just a touch. Casual. Unconscious. The way you might reach for a blanket in your sleep, seeking warmth. I didn't move. I let her hand rest on my shoulder, let the weight of it anchor me to the present. And for the first time in 22 years, I fell asleep without nightmares. I woke up in bed. Not the floor, not the armchair, my bed, the massive one in the guest suite, with the white linens and the soft pillows. Someone had tucked the blankets around me, smooth and neat. Serena's blazer was draped over the foot of the bed, the one she had given me in the car. I pressed my face into the fabric and breathed. 42 days. That's how long I existed in Serena Blackwood's house without a single blow landing on my skin. My reflection in the bathroom mirror was slowly becoming someone I didn't recognize. The hollow, bruised caverns under my eyes had faded to a dull, exhausted purple, finally giving way to skin that looked almost healthy. The sharp, jutting angles of my collarbones were softening, padded by the heavy, rich meals Mrs. Hartwell produced 3 times a day. I was wearing a pair of soft, dark cotton sweatpants and an oversized black t-shirt I'd found in the closet clothes Mrs. Hartwell had bought for me, probably, though no one had ever asked my size. They fit well enough. Better than anything I had ever owned. The collar was gone. The bruises were fading. The hunger was a distant memory. But something else was building. I felt it first as a restlessness, an itch beneath my skin that I couldn't scratch. I found myself pacing the length of my room, unable to sit still, unable to focus on anything. The notebook Mrs. Hartwell had given me leather-bound, with cream-colored pages and a heavy mechanical pencil, sat untouched on the nightstand. I had nothing to write, nothing to say. The restlessness grew worse over the next few days. Then came the heat. Not the warmth of a room or the flush of embarrassment. This was a burning, deep in my bones, starting at the base of my spine and radiating outward like someone had poured molten gold into my veins. I dropped the book I had been pretending to read. It hit the floor with a dull thud. My hands flew to my stomach. The muscles there were clenching, spasming, a deep ache that had nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with biology I had spent years trying to ignore. No, not now. Not here. I was an omega. I had presented at 15, in a house that treated my first heat like a nuisance rather than a milestone. My father had thrown a box of suppressants at my head and told me to lock myself in the basement so I didn't stink up the house. I had spent 7 years suppressing my heats. 7 years of pills and patches and injections that left me hollow and numb, that made me feel like a ghost in my own body. But I had been in Serena's house for over a month. No suppressants. No doctor's prescription. Just rich food, clean water, safety, and the constant, overwhelming presence of an alpha whose scent made my hindbrain sing. My body had decided it was safe. And now it was demanding what it had been denied for nearly a decade. The second wave hit as I was scrambling off the bed. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the nightstand, knocking over the glass of water Mrs. Hartwell had left. It shattered on the floor, but I barely heard it. My skin was on fire. Every nerve ending was screaming. And underneath the fire, something worse. Slick. I pressed my thighs together, a strangled, silent gasp tearing through my chest. No. No, no, no. I couldn't, not here, not in her house, not where she could smell. The door burst open. I didn't hear the handle turn. I didn't hear footsteps. I just looked up and she was there. Serena. Her suit jacket was gone. Her silk blouse was untucked, half unbuttoned, revealing the lean lines of her collarbones and the top of a black sports bra. Her dark hair was loose, falling in wild waves around her pale face. Her sleeves were rolled up, exposing her forearms, the veins standing out against her skin. But it wasn't her appearance that froze the blood in my veins. It was her eyes. The silver was gone, swallowed by black. Her pupils had blown so wide there was almost no color left. Her chest was heaving, her nostrils flared, and the scent. Oh God, the scent. Wintergreen and wood smoke and vanilla, yes, but amplified 100 times. It filled the room, filled my lungs, thick and heady and hungry. Underneath it, something darker. Smoke. Embers. The smell of a forest fire, of something wild and uncontrollable barely leashed. Her rut. She was going into rut. I had triggered her rut. Evelyn, she started, and her voice was wrecked. Low. Rough. Vibrating with a frequency that made my bones hum. I tried to say her name. Nothing came out. My throat was a broken drum, and even if it worked, I wouldn't have been able to form words. My brain was short-circuiting, drowning in her. She took a step into the room. I scrambled backward, my bare feet slipping in the broken glass. I didn't feel the shards cutting into my soles. All I could feel was the heat, the slick, the terrifying, compelling pull toward the alpha who was staring at me like I was the last source of oxygen in a burning world. You're in heat, she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, frantic, my hands fluttering uselessly at my sides. How long since your last one? I held up 7 fingers. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them raised. 7 months. I shook my head. Tears were streaming down my face now, silent and hot. I pointed at myself, then held up the 7 fingers again. Then I pointed at the floor, at the room, at her. I didn't have the words. I didn't have the voice. But Serena understood. 7 years. Her jaw tightened. The muscle ticked once, twice, 3 times. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. You've been suppressing for 7 years? I nodded. Something moved behind her eyes. Something dark and furious that wasn't directed at me. She took a slow, deliberate breath, visibly forcing her shoulders down, forcing the alpha rage back into its cage. Her scent spiked with effort, the wintergreen sharp and clean as she fought for control. Okay, she said, her voice carefully, impossibly controlled. Okay, Evelyn. I need you to listen to me. I was trembling so hard I could barely stand. Another wave of heat rolled through me, and I doubled over, my arms wrapping around my stomach. A broken, silent sob racked my chest. Serena's scent flared, not with aggression, but with concern. It was the strangest thing I had ever smelled from an alpha in the presence of an omega in heat. No predatory satisfaction. No hungry anticipation. Just worry. I'm going to call Dr. Chin, she said, reaching for her pocket. She can prescribe emergency suppressants. I lunged. I don't know what came over me. 7 years of suppressed biology, 7 years of denial, 7 years of telling myself I didn't need this, didn't want this, that heats were a weakness to be medicated away. It all shattered in an instant. I grabbed her wrist. Serena went absolutely still. Her skin was hot under my fingers. Hotter than it should have been. I could feel her pulse hammering against my palm, rabbit fast, and I realized with a jolt of primal satisfaction that she wasn't unaffected. The Alpha Queen, the woman who had looked at me like I was a solved problem, was struggling. Evelyn, she said, and this time her voice cracked. The control was splintering. I could hear it in the ragged edge of her breath, see it in the way her pupils swallowed the silver. Let go of my wrist. I shook my head. I pressed her hand against my chest, right over my heart. Feel it, I wanted to scream. Feel what you've done to me. Feel what 6 weeks of safety has undone. Her fingers splayed against my sternum. Her palm was so large it covered half my ribcage. She didn't pull away. God, she breathed. The word was barely audible, more exhale than sound. You smell. She cut herself off, jaw snapping shut. I waited. My heart was a wild drum against her hand. You smell like home, she finished, and the admission seemed to cost her something vital. Like rain on dry earth. Like the first breath after being underwater too long. Another wave of slick soaked through my sweatpants. The smell of it, honey and wildflowers and something uniquely me, mixed with her wintergreen and wood smoke until I couldn't tell where I ended and she began. Serena made a sound low in her throat. A growl, but not a threatening one. It vibrated through her chest, through her hand, through me, and my knees finally gave out. She caught me. Her arms wrapped around my waist, hauling me against her chest. I was burning, and she was cool, not cold, but cooler, like a river after a fever. I pressed my face into the crook of her neck and breathed. Wintergreen, wood smoke, vanilla, and underneath it all, something that was just her. Something that made my omega hindbrain curl up and purr. Evelyn, she said, and her voice was rough, pained. I can't if you keep doing that. I didn't know what that was. Breathing? Existing? Pressing my overheated body against the only source of relief in a world made of fire? I tilted my head back, looked up at her through tear-blurred eyes. Her face was a mask of agony. Not physical pain, though I imagined holding back an alpha's instincts during an omega's heat was its own special torture, but something deeper. Something that looked like fear. I won't take advantage of you, she said, and the words were gritted out between clenched teeth. Not like this. Not when you can't. I pressed 2 fingers against her lips. She fell silent. I pulled back just enough to reach for the notebook on the nightstand. My hands were shaking so badly the pencil slipped twice before I could grip it. I scrawled 3 words, the letters jagged and desperate, the graphite nearly snapping under the pressure. I trust you. I turned the notebook around. Serena stared at the words. Her throat worked. Her arms tightened around me. She stopped. Swallowed. Started again. That's the most terrifying thing anyone has ever said to me. I tilted my head, questioning. She pulled me closer until there was no space left between us. Her nose brushed against my temple, then lower, tracing the line of my jaw. She wasn't kissing, not yet, just scenting, mapping the curve of my neck with shallow breaths. Do you know what you're asking for? She murmured against my skin. I shivered. Nodded. A claiming bite isn't just a mark, Evelyn. It's permanent. It ties your heat to my rut. It ties your life to mine. If something happens to me, I pressed the notebook against her chest. She looked down. Nothing is going to happen to you. A sound escaped her, half laugh, half groan. You don't know that. I know. I underlined the words twice, pressing so hard the paper nearly tore. You're the alpha queen. And you didn't hit me when I broke your plate. She blinked. What? That's how I knew. I wrote faster, the words spilling out of me like water from a broken dam, everything I had never been able to say pouring onto the page. My family hit me for everything. Breathing too loud. Looking the wrong way. Existing. You didn't hit me for breaking something valuable. You cleaned it up yourself. You bled on the floor and you didn't even get angry. I paused, then added, you put your blazer on me when I was cold. Serena was very still. You sat on the floor in the dark so I wouldn't be alone. You burned my collar. You gave me a notebook. You slept in a chair and let me sit beside you. I looked up at her, tears streaming down my face, and wrote the last words with a hand that had finally stopped shaking. You made me believe I'm not broken. So yes, I trust you. Bite me. The world stopped. Serena looked at the notebook, then at me, then at the notebook again. Her scent shifted. The wintergreen didn't disappear, but it changed, sharpening into something electric, something alive. The wood smoke deepened, darkened, until it smelled less like a campfire and more like the heart of a storm. And underneath it all, the vanilla. Steady. Grounding. Safe. "I'm going to mark you," she said, and her voice was no longer rough with restraint. It was soft. Reverent. "Not because you're in heat. Not because I bought you. Because you asked me to. Do you understand the difference?" I nodded. "You're not my property, Evelyn. You're not my investment. You're not a lawn ornament or a corporate middle finger." She cupped my face in her hands, her thumbs brushing away my tears with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "You're mine. And I'm yours." That's what a claiming bite means. Equality. Partnership. A pack of two. I leaned into her touch. Let my eyes fall half closed. "Do it," I wrote one last time. "Before I change my mind." She almost smiled. "That's not how this works. You won't change your mind." "How do you know?" She pressed her forehead against mine. The answer was a whisper against my lips. "Because I've been yours since the moment you walked off that stage." The claiming happened slowly. Not the bite itself. That was fast. A sharp press of teeth against the juncture of my neck and shoulder. A sudden burst of pain that dissolved almost instantly into something else. Something that felt like completion. Like a door that had been locked my entire life finally swinging open. But everything before that, the slow, deliberate undressing, the way she laid me on the bed like I was made of glass, the way she kissed every bruise that still lingered on my ribs, every faded scar, every patch of skin that had been touched only by violence. That took hours. She worshipped me. That was the only word for it. She worshipped my broken body with her hands and her mouth and her scent, and by the time she finally lowered herself over me, I was sobbing, not from pain, not from fear, but from the overwhelming, unbearable rightness of it. "Ready?" she asked, her forehead pressed against mine, her dark hair falling around us like a curtain, blocking out the rest of the world. I nodded. She bit down. The world exploded into light. I don't remember much of the next 3 days. Heat and rut intertwined like vines, wrapping around us until I couldn't tell where her skin ended and mine began. We slept and woke and kneaded and slept again. She fed me by hand when I couldn't hold a fork. She carried me to the bathroom when my legs wouldn't work. She held me through every wave, her scent a constant anchor, her voice a low murmur against my hair. "You're doing so well, Omega. Breathe. Just breathe. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere." And when it was over, when the fever finally broke and my bones stopped burning and the slick dried on my thighs, I woke up in a tangle of sheets and limbs, my head pillowed on her chest, her hand tangled in my hair. The bite mark on my neck was already healing. A scar that would never fade. A sign to the world that I belonged to someone. But the real claim wasn't the bite. It was the way she looked at me when she realized I was awake. Sleepy. Soft. Human. "Hey," she said. I smiled. No sound. Just the curve of my lips, the crinkle of my eyes. She smiled back. "Hey yourself." I reached for the notebook on the nightstand. My hand was steady now. The tremors were gone. "I'm hungry." Serena laughed, a real laugh, low and warm, the first I had ever heard from her. "I'll make you breakfast." "You can cook?" "Don't sound so surprised." I wrote, "You're a billionaire." "I assumed you had people for that." She read the note, still smiling, and kissed the top of my head. "I have people for a lot of things. But making you breakfast? That's mine." She got up, completely unself-conscious in her nakedness, and walked toward the bathroom. I watched her go, tracing the lines of her back, the claiming mark I had left on her own neck, a mirror of hers on me. The bite was smaller than hers. Omegas couldn't bite as hard as alphas, but it was there. A promise. A bond. She stopped at the doorway. Looked back. "One more thing," she said. I tilted my head. "The man who sold you. Lucas. Your father." Her voice flattened, the alpha queen bleeding through the softness. They won't bother you again. I made sure of it. I waited. I didn't hurt them, Serena said, reading the question in my eyes. I didn't need to. I just made it very, very clear that if they ever come near you, they'll lose everything. Their house. Their jobs. Every dollar they've ever touched. Lucas is already working construction for minimum wage. Your father's drinking himself into an early grave in a studio apartment with no heat. That's worse than hurting them. Good. She said it simply, without malice. They hurt you. They sold you like an animal. They don't get to walk away unscathed. I stared at her for a long moment. Then I wrote, "You're terrifying. Only to people who deserve it." And to me? She walked back across the room, knelt beside the bed, and pressed a kiss to my knuckles. "To you," she said, "I'm just Serena." 3 months later, I stood in the doorway of her library, our library now, because she had added a desk for me in the corner, stocked with notebooks and pencils and a view of the forest, and watched her work. She looked up, smiled. "Come here." I walked over, bare feet silent on the Persian rug, and let her pull me into her lap. She buried her face in my neck, inhaling deeply. The scent of wintergreen and wood smoke wrapped around me, familiar and safe. "You smell like honey today," she murmured against my skin. "And rain. My favorite combination." I tapped her chest until she looked up, then pointed at myself, then at her, then made a writing motion. "You want to tell me something?" I nodded, grabbed my notebook from her desk. "I never thought I'd have this." She read the words. Her arm tightened around my waist. "Have what?" "Safety. Silence that isn't lonely. Someone who doesn't need me to speak." I paused, then added, "Someone who listens anyway." Serena was quiet for a long time. Then she turned my face toward hers, her hand gentle on my jaw, and kissed me. Soft. Slow. Deep. Her lips tasted like coffee and something sweeter, something that was just her. The kiss said everything she didn't need to say out loud. When she pulled back, her silver eyes were bright. "I spent my whole life thinking I didn't need anyone," she said. "I was wrong. I needed you. I just didn't know it yet." I pressed my forehead against hers. "I know the feeling." She laughed, that warm, real laugh that was mine alone to hear, and pulled me closer. Outside, rain began to fall against the floor-to-ceiling windows. The forest beyond was dark and wild, but inside, there was light. There was warmth. There was the smell of wintergreen and wood smoke and honey, tangled together until they were inseparable. I was mute. I would never speak a single word out loud. But for the first time in my life, I didn't need to. Because Serena Blackwood, the Alpha Queen, the winter storm in a charcoal suit, the woman who bought me as a corporate middle finger and kept me as a home, listened to my silence. And in that silence, she heard everything.